Good day. Do you know who a judge is? Is it true that these people act according to the law and abide by it in the future? And what about charity? Are the people who do it so kind in their thoughts and actions? What is hidden behind the walls of their luxurious mansions, and what secrets do they keep? I will lift the curtain of the mystery of their lives, and you will learn the whole truth. If you are ready, then let's begin. Somewhere in a small town in the state of Vermont, there is a picturesque little place. Among the dense forests and hills, there was an old mansion with towers entwined with ivy, and tables with windows reflecting the scarlet sunsets. A narrow road, guarded by centuries-old oaks and elms, led to it, and the back house was spread out on territory resembling a well-kept park, neatly trimmed lawns, 10 flower beds with bright flowers, picturesque fountains, and an artificial pond with water lilies. Here lived the Carter family, an influential and wealthy couple who inspired respect and even some fear. Stephen Carter, a 55-year-old senator from Vermont, was a superior man with a cold look and an authoritative voice, accustomed to keeping every little thing in his life under control. His wife, Catherine Carter, was a couple of years younger than her husband, and had recently retired as a justice of the state Supreme Court. Her strict manner and piercing, it seemed, could tremble even the most imperturbable glances. The Carters were childless, but they regularly demonstrated their generosity by providing financial assistance to orphanages and shelters. Stephen often gave speeches in public about supporting vulnerable groups of the population, and Catherine actively participated in charitable events, becoming a member of the board of various foundations. Their mansion was never empty. An army of servants constantly maintained order and comfort in the house. Gardeners, cooks, maids, and personal assistants. They all had one strange form in common. The staff changed regularly. Employees appeared and disappeared without a trace, after the slightest malfunction or even minor mistakes. Shouts and angry reproaches from the mistress of the house became a familiar part of their life. However, no one asked questions or looked for adventure. New flower beds with magnificent roses and peonies appeared soon after just another performance, as if stroking the memory of the previous employees. One day, a surprise burst into the Carters' quiet life. A young woman of about 25 appeared at the door of the mansion with a suitcase in her hand. Her name was Emily, and she claimed that Stephen's daughter from an affair had been born many years ago in Washington. Her mother had recently died, and the girl, having lost all support, decided to find her biological father. Stephen, shocked and unaware of the existence of his daughter, after some hesitation accepted her, realizing that refusal would damage his reputation. Catherine, irritated and suspicious, agreed to accept the guest on one condition. Emily must join the work at home and not give any special privileges. Emily agreed, not even suspecting that she would have to face the secrets and horrors hidden behind the luxurious facade of the family mansion. She did not yet know that she would soon become a witness to the terrible crimes and deadly secrets of the Carter family. Emily crossed the threshold of the huge Carter mansion for the first time with an anxious feeling that made her heart clench. The house inside seemed even larger and darker than the outside. High ceilings, massive dark wood furniture, and walls decorated with gloomy portraits that seemed to follow her every step, weighed on her consciousness and caused a feeling of hopelessness. "Welcome," Catherine said coldly, studying Emily from head to toe. "I hope you understand that there is no place for weakness and laziness here. Everyone must work in this house." Emily nodded, not daring to object. That same day, Catherine assigned her to help the servants in the garden, and soon the girl found herself among many magnificent flower beds, the flowers on which smelled especially strong, almost suffocating. When Emily touched one of the buds, the gardener, an elderly man with sad eyes, said quietly, "Better not touch them, miss. These flowers, they are special, very special." "Special?" Emily asked in surprise. "Better not ask, miss." The gardener turned away abruptly and went about his work. In the evening at dinner, the atmosphere was heavy. Catherine sarcastically commented on Emily's every movement, and her father watched silently, pretending that nothing unusual was happening. The awkward silence was broken by the sound of a broken vase. The young maid froze in place, pale with horror. "What have you done, you incompetent girl?" Catherine's voice broke into a hysterical scream. "You have no idea how much this vase costs. It's my fault." Emily suddenly stood up for herself. "I accidentally knocked it over when I was passing by. Don't you dare lie to me." Catherine stepped forward, her eyes blazing with rage. "You've only just arrived here, and you're already covering for these talentless losers. Remember, lies and weakness are not tolerated here. Next time it will be you." These words were said in such an ominous tone that Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Emily woke up at night from terrible screams. Her heart was pounding wildly, her hands were shaking. Carefully looking out the window, she noticed a strange light in the depths of the garden where she had not yet been. The light was dim, flickering, as if from torches. With horror, the girl realized that someone was there, something was happening. An overwhelming feeling of fear and curiosity came over her. Putting her coat on over her nightgown, Emily slipped out of the room silently. She moved through the dark corridors, trying not to make any noise, her breathing ragged with excitement. The closer she got to the garden, the clearer she heard strange, frightening sounds, like muffled groans and someone's muffled cries for help. Hiding behind a tree, Emily saw a picture that made her blood freeze in her veins. In the light of the torches, surrounded by the darkness of the night, stood Catherine. In her hands was a knife, shining with blood. In front of her, on her knees, was the young maid, the same one who broke the vase. Her eyes were filled with tears of horror, and her body was shaking from hopelessness and fear. "You made a mistake, girl." Catherine's voice sounded merciless and cold. "Now you will pay for it in full." Emily froze, realizing the full horror of what was happening, and realized that her life in this house had just changed dramatically. Emily could not stand the horror and rushed from the spot. Her feet carried her away from the garden, down the dark hallway of the mansion, her heart pounding and her breath coming in panicked gasps. She stumbled over the carpets, clutching her hands to her chest, until she finally reached her room, slammed the door, and pressed her back against it, listening to the silence of the night. The sound of footsteps came again outside the window, and Catherine's voice tense and suspicious. "Who's there?" "I know someone was." The voice faded, but left an icy echo in Emily's ears. She sat on the floor until dawn, unable to close her eyes. The next morning, everything looked as if nothing had happened. But one detail immediately caught her eye. The maid was gone, as if she had never been there. Emily poured herself some tea with trembling hands when her father approached. "Papa, I need to talk to you," she began carefully. Where is the maid?" "I haven't seen her since this morning." Stephen's face darkened. He looked at her sternly. "I advise you, Emily, not to meddle where you are not wanted. Do you understand?" Emily felt fear squeezing her throat, but something inside her demanded to continue. At night she clearly saw what she saw. She decided to act. In the following days, Emily began to discreetly question the staff. The maids and gardeners looked at her with suspicion and said the same thing. "Mrs. Carter is a saintly woman, she is kind and fair." No one said a word, more than necessary, and some simply turned away, leaving as if they were afraid to even hold a conversation. Emily also tried to find something on the internet, articles, rumors, gossip, but everything she found painted Catherine in the best light: charity, donations, social activities, an impeccable reputation. But Emily knew it was just a facade. One day, unable to bear it any longer, she decided to return to that very spot in the garden. It was a cloudy day. The sky was covered with clouds. Everything around seemed faded and dead. She walked along an overgrown path, her heart pounding wildly. Here was that very spot. The flower bed seemed ideal. The flowers were neatly arranged. The ground was leveled. But Emily could not be fooled. She dropped to her knees and began to tear at the damp earth with her hands. After a few minutes, her nails hit something hard. Carefully removing a layer of soil, she froze. Small fragments of bone and something that looked like shreds of flesh that had absorbed the dirt came to light. The smell that began to rise from the ground was disgusting, sticky, like death itself. Emily recoiled, covering her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming. Her hands were shaking and tears were rolling down her cheeks. She realized one thing: this house was hiding a horror that could not be described in words. And now she had become part of this deadly game, from which it would be almost impossible to escape. Night fell on the mansion again, and the silence was cut by shrill screams. Emily froze in her room, clutching the bedspread in her hands. The sounds were even more frightening than the last time. The roar of a chainsaw, a loud, ear-splitting roar. Panic paralyzed her until dawn. She didn't dare look out, pressing herself against the wall and praying that it was all a nightmare. In the morning, the Carters were getting ready to leave on business. Stephen looked gloomy, and Catherine, pulling on her gloves, threw Emily a look that made her whole body tense to the point of aching. A silent warning was read in that look. I know everything. As soon as their car disappeared behind the gate, Emily, pretending to work on the flower beds, began digging again, but this time with purpose. Each new place hid the same thing: shreds of fabric, bone fragments, hairs. Some of the finds were fresh, with an eerie, sweetish smell of decay. Fear squeezed her throat, but something inside pushed her to go on. She dug with her hands, breaking her nails, until the sun began to set. Towards evening, exhausted, she went to the old shed on the edge of the property. It was an inconspicuous building where tools were stored: shovels, axes, hammers. Inside, it was semi-dark and damp, and then her gaze fell on a massive cabinet. Suspicion crept in instantly. Gathering the last of her strength, Emily pushed the cabinet with all her might, and a narrow door with an iron handle opened before her. The lock was open. She entered. The inside smelled of rot and chemicals. The room resembled a hellish laboratory. Bloody hooks, chains, knives, and saws of all sizes hung along the walls. The floor was covered in dried blood. The stains on the walls created eerie abstractions. In the corner stood metal tables with deep furrows, where bodies had obviously been dismembered. Rows of jars with an unknown liquid and packages wrapped in burlap lay on the shelves. Thin finger bones and hair fragments protruded from them. On the wall hung photographs of perfectly manicured flower beds, each with a signature, date, and a name. Emily read a few. Maria, April 12th. Thomas, May 3rd. These were the dates of death and new plantings. On the table lay a diary. She opened it with trembling hands. The new flower bed is delightful. Friends from the gardening club are delighted. No one will guess what these flowers are fed with. Every mistake should bloom luxuriously. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back the vomit. The room seemed alive, as if the very earth was breathing and absorbing all these horrors. Here, Catherine had embodied her nightmares, turning people into fertilizer for her devilish gardens. And now Emily knew there was no turning back. The night dragged on painfully long, and Emily was still shaking from what she had seen. Her mind refused to believe what was happening, but every detail of that room, the smells and terrible finds, haunted her, not allowing her to come to her senses. She did not notice how time flew by. Moonlight spilled across the floor, illuminating bloodstains and metal hooks, when suddenly the sound of footsteps was heard from behind. From the darkness, as if from hell itself, Catherine appeared. Her face was distorted by a grin, and her eyes, filled with cold fury, burned like a predator. She was silent for a moment, just staring, then said in a voice that sent shivers down her spine, "I always knew you couldn't resist. Curiosity is your undoing, girl." Emily backed away, gasping in horror. "Catherine, please, I won't tell anyone. I just—" "Shut up!" Catherine interrupted, her eyes flashing with fury. "You saw things no one was supposed to see. You think this is just a game? No, sweetheart, you're not a guest here anymore. You're fertilizer." She lunged forward, grabbed Emily by the hair, and yanked her down so hard that the girl screamed. The rope wrapped around her arms and legs, restricting her every movement. Emily resisted, but the punches to her face and ribs quickly wore her down. Catherine's breath came in hoarse gasps of excitement as she was pulled toward the metal table. "You don't understand what pain means yet," she whispered with a mad grin, taking out a knife and slowly running it over Emily's skin, leaving thin scarlet stripes. "Here I will teach you to suffer. Oh, how I have waited for this moment." Catherine lit the lamp, which illuminated the room with a deathly light, emphasizing every drop of blood, every rusty chain. The walls seemed to narrow. The air was filled with the stench of fear and decay. Emily tried to scream, but Catherine covered her mouth, whispering right in her ear, "Quiet. You don't want to wake Daddy, do you? He's so tired." She took out a pair of pliers and a red-hot rod from the drawer and applied it to Emily's body. Wild pain pierced every cell of her body. Catherine scratched her nails along the open wounds, splashed ice water on her so that she would not lose consciousness. "Look at me," she hissed. "I want to see your eyes when you realize your life is over." Blood dripped onto the floor, mixing with the dirt and remains of past victims. The room seemed to come alive. The walls vibrated from the horrific sounds, and Emily's head was filled with one thought. It would be better if she died right away. The last thing she saw was the distorted glee on her stepmother's face and the chainsaw that she slowly raised above her body, preparing to complete her bloody craft. Emily was about to give up on life. Pain and fear gripped her body. Her mind was on the verge of shutting down. The chainsaw howled louder and louder. The air trembled with tension, and at that moment, footsteps sounded far away in the house. Stephen Carter woke up in the middle of the night with an unpleasant feeling of a lump in his throat and a headache. He lay there for a long time, listening to the eerie silence of the mansion, before getting up to drink some water. The kitchen was dead silent, and the glass in his hand trembled, as if reflecting his inner turmoil. Setting it down on the table, he noticed that Catherine was not in the bedroom, and her phone was still on the nightstand. "Cat," he called dully, but there was no answer. He slowly climbed the stairs, peered into the rooms. No Catherine, no Emily. A strange premonition fell on his chest like a heavy lump. His heart began to beat faster. He went outside. The night chill washed over his face, and for a moment he froze, peering into the darkness of the garden. The moonlight illuminated the paths and endless flower beds, each of which seemed strangely sinister. He took a few steps forward and stopped. as if his feet had grown into the ground. His gaze fell on the half-open door of the barn. A chill ran down his skin. He knew this place, knew it too well, but he had always avoided going close. Even looking in that direction was unpleasant. But now something was pulling him there, like a deadly magnet. Every step was hard. His heart was beating louder and louder. His ears were blocked. His fingers were numb. He felt that something would open behind this door, from which he would never recover. With a trembling hand, he pushed the door. The first thing that hit him was the smell. A disgusting, thick, nauseating cocktail of rot and blood. The room was illuminated by the dim light of the lamp, casting elongated shadows on the walls. His eyes slid over the pools of blood on the floor, over the walls hung with hooks and saws, over the iron tables with rusty chains and dried traces of torture. But the worst was yet to come. He saw Catherine. She was standing with her back to him. Her arms were covered in blood up to the elbows, and in front of her, tied to the table, Emily hung lifelessly, disfigured, tortured, with wounds that screamed of inhuman torment. Stephen took a step forward, and the floor creaked under his foot. Catherine turned around abruptly. Her face was distorted by mad rage and something devilishly bestial. For a second there was deathly silence. Only drops of blood falling from the instruments broke it. Stephen was seized with horror that made his heart clench. His worst fears had come true. He looked at his wife and realized that the monster he had been afraid to even think about was standing right in front of him. And now this nightmare could not be stopped. Catherine and Stephen stood in tense silence for a few moments, as if time had frozen, squeezing them in a deadly vice. Catherine's eyes were blazing with madness, the bloody chainsaw still shaking in her hand. "What are you doing, Cat?" Stephen's voice wavered, but he took a step forward. "That's our daughter. Look what you've done." "A daughter?" Catherine laughed, the sound echoing as if the room itself were mocking him. "She's like the others, a mistake, filth. Her blood feeds my flowers. You always knew, Stephen, but you kept quiet. I didn't know you were a monster." His voice was breaking. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the weapon from her, but Catherine pushed him away with more force, more inhuman fury than anyone could imagine. "Don't you dare stop me! She's almost done!" she screamed, raising the saw again. Emily was sobbing, her hands shaking and covered in blood, reaching for the chains, trying to free herself. Stephen grabbed the crowbar and swung at the saw, sending it flying off with a crash. He lunged for his daughter, freeing one of the chains. Catherine screamed and dug her nails into his face, scratching until she bled. They fell to the floor, fighting like animals, screaming and growling. Catherine yanked the knife and swung it, but Stephen grabbed her arm, blocking the blow, and with desperate force plunged the crowbar into her side. Catherine let out a piercing scream, her eyes bloodshot, and she staggered to the floor, clutching her bloody side. "You, traitor! Coward!" she wheezed, crawling through the dirt and blood. Emily, meanwhile, covered in blood and bruises, broke free from her last bonds. She could barely stand on her feet, gasping for air. The room was spinning, but she knew she had to get out. Her father turned to her, covered in scratches and blood. "Quick! Run!" But Catherine rose again, howling like a wild animal, her eyes full of hatred. The room filled with screams, the sounds of objects falling in wheezing pain. This nightmare had reached the point of no return. Emily, gathering her remaining strength, rushed to the door, leaving bloody footprints behind her, her ears still cut by the screams of her distraught stepmother and the heavy breathing of her father, who stayed behind to hold back the monster. She knew this night would change everything forever, Emily, bleeding, scrambled along the ground, leaving scarlet footprints on the damp grass. The cold air cut her face. Her breath was ragged in desperate sobs. Every meter was given with inhuman difficulty. She knew, if she did not get home, it was all over. Through a moaning voice, gritting her teeth in pain, she began to scream, shaking the night darkness. "Help! Help!" The screams echoed, rang between the trees in the mansion, reached the windows, behind which the servants were trembling with fear. No one dared to come out, but two gardeners, exchanging glances, ran toward the sound. They turned pale when they saw Emily, exhausted. "Faster," she croaked, grabbing one of them by the arm. "She'll kill him. My father. Faster." The gardeners picked her up and dragged her toward the house, sweating from the horror that hung around them. They knew that there had always been something dark hidden in this house, but now the evil had broken out. Meanwhile, in the barn, Stephen and Catherine were struggling not only with each other, but also with themselves. Their screams drowned out the clanking of metal and the creaking of shelves. Stephen, covered in blood, tried to fight him off, but Catherine seemed mad. "You were always a weakling," she growled, waving her knife. "You knew and you kept quiet. You're just like the rest of them." Stephen, covered in cuts, was breathing heavily and stumbling to the tool rack. His hand fell on the garden shears. When Catherine lunged at him again, he, with a tortured movement, plunged the shears straight into her stomach. Catherine froze. Her eyes widened with pain and rage, and her mouth twisted into a silent scream. She slowly sank to the floor, blood spreading in a thick darkness across the floor, soaking into the boards. Stephen sank down next to her, holding her by the shoulders, trying to clamp down on the fatal wound. "Why, Cat, why?" He trembled, looking into her eyes, full of pain and madness. "You could have stopped. Why did you do this? For what?" Catherine gasped for air, wheezing, smiling weakly through the blood. "For everything to bloom. For everyone to see how beautiful. My garden." Meanwhile, Emily reached the house and, almost losing consciousness, fell at the threshold. She barely made it to the phone, dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Help! The Carter mansion. Murder." Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. After that, she collapsed exhausted on the floor, her body no longer obeying. Stephen, staggering, crawled out of the barn, dragging blood-stained clothes behind him. His face was deathly pale, his lips trembled. He sat on the ground, staring into the night with empty eyes. The flickering of flashing lights cut through the darkness. The police flew into the area with the screeching of tires. Shouts, orders, the sounds of running footsteps. The scene that appeared before the police was so terrifying that many froze for a moment. The tortured Emily, the half-dead Stephen, and the bloody barn, in which the shadows on the walls were still trembling, as if death itself refused to leave this place. The daughter and father were rushed to the hospital. Emily was lying on a gurney in a semi-conscious state. Her face and body were covered in bandages and bruises. Her eyes were empty and full of horror. Stephen, covered in blood and with a shocked expression on his face, held her hand until the very threshold of the operating room, until they were separated. Flashes of cameras flashed outside the windows. News of the bloody drama in the Carter mansion spread throughout the state, gathering crowds of reporters near the hospital. Meanwhile, the police cordoned off the house. Interrogations began immediately after Emily came to. She spoke in a trembling voice about her stepmother's secret gardening rituals, about how she had been killing for years and fertilizing her flower beds with bodies. The police, who had seen a lot, could not hide their shock after visiting the barn and inspecting the house. But when Emily insisted on showing them the garden, the place that everyone had previously considered a model of perfection, even the most seasoned of them recoiled. Under the sensitive guidance of investigators, excavations began. The very first flower bed revealed the terrible truth. The remains of hands, fragments of skulls, remnants of clothing, rotten bones mixed with earth and the roots of lush flowers. One of the officers stood, pale as death, and whispered, This is hell under the veil of beauty." They dug all day and night. Each flower bed hid horrific finds, dozens of bodies buried for years. It turned out that Catherine had been killing for decades. Gardeners, maids, odd workers, all disappeared after the slightest offense, turning into feed for her hellish garden. Her husband, Stephen, knew, or rather guessed, but kept silent, afraid of destroying his world. Now his silence became proof of guilt. He was arrested right in hospital when he was still recovering from the operation. Emily stood in the hallway, clinging to the walls, and whispered through her tears, "Daddy, forgive me." He just nodded, his eyes full of immense guilt. Soon after the arrest, Stephen asked to see his daughter several times. Emily came, sat with him behind bars, held his hand despite everything, but Stephen's gaze gradually faded. He could not bear either the condemnation or his own betrayal. The last visit was especially difficult. He looked at Emily with empty eyes, spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, "You have to move on. Forget about me. Forget this nightmare." A week later, Stephen Carter was found hanged in his cell. The newspapers again exploded with headlines, "The Curse of the House of Carter, Senator Commits Suicide." Emily stood silently at his funeral, dressed all in black, her face stony. Pain and emptiness raged inside her, but she held on, because there was no one left. She returned to the empty mansion one night. Standing in the middle of the garden, looking at the luxurious flowers that were still blooming as if nothing had happened, she whispered through tears, "You are still here, all of you." Suddenly the night wind stirred the petals, and a strange sound was heard, as if someone sighed underground. Emily froze, her eyes filled with horror. She turned away and walked towards the house, but somewhere inside she felt, "This story is not over yet. This is the end for now, but do not forget that it depends only on you whether this story will get a second life. The one that gets the most likes and views will find its continuation with an equally creepy and terrible development of events. It all depends only on you. Thank you for being with us."